Make your marks.
You're listening to the Pullbuoy podcast.
Steve here, welcome back to the Pullbuoy podcast. We are leaping on to the second stage of this great summer of international swimming competition. The Worlds are done, so the Commonwealth Games are the next stop for our swimmers. Bob and Katie are back with us for this episode. Delighted to say we've beefed up the lineup for this Commonwealth Games by getting someone who knows a thing or two about them. 4 medals, including 2 gold. Commonwealth Champion Ross Davenport, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and really looking forward to previewing what should be a really exciting games.
It should indeed. There are lots of little subplots and stories going on. Bob, this meet comes hot on the heels of the World Championships. Lots of people focus possibly more on this than on Worlds. I don't know if you got that vibe when you were in Budapest.
Yeah, I did very much. I came off the back of the Worlds thinking, do you know what? Most of these swimmers are not peaking for this event. They are peaking for the one in between, which is the Commonwealth Games. And I think there were people who were a bit undercooked, a bit underdone, maybe hadn't quite got their prep right. There were signs with quite a few of the swimmers who improved as the week went on in Budapest. They were just kind of easing their way in, getting themselves into that kind of form, looking like they were going to peak at the right time for the commies at the end of July, beginning of August. So I think we'll see some very good performances. So I wouldn't be too concerned by a few people being under par in Budapest, because I think ultimately this is the one that most people were really aiming for.
Ross, you swam Worlds, you swam Commonwealths. Given the choice, which one would you have focused on, given this close together? I know Worlds came in later and probably mucked up everybody's plans, but would you have prioritised the home Commonwealth Games?
In terms of the prestige, the Commonwealth Games is always bigger because it's in people's mind. Second biggest games to the Olympic Games. So I think from a general public's point of view, the Commonwealth Games seem to be a bigger deal. But from a swimming perspective, it is definitely the World Championships, because obviously everybody's there. But it's different because we've never had the World Championships, the Commonwealth Games, and the Europeans in the same year, or certainly not from what I can remember. Generally there is the Europeans and the Commonwealths, so people have to prioritise. But yeah, I certainly think because of the way that the World Championships fell earlier on in the year after a tough Olympic cycle, a 5-year Olympic cycle in Tokyo, coming into August time last year, I think people have bypassed the World Championships just because they had a big break and they generally weren't going to be ready for it. So whether they're targeting the Commonwealths or the Europeans more than the Worlds, I don't think that's the case. I think it's purely a timing basis. But for swimmers that are going to do all three, they get the opportunity to come away with a sack full of medals. And it's an opportunity that is once in a lifetime for swimmers, and only very few swimmers out there actually come away with any hardware anyway. So it's an exciting year, and if you could have got back in the pool straight away and targeted the Worlds and then rolled on to the Commonwealths, I think you'll be in great stead in a few days' time.
And Katie, we know that Australia are focusing on the Commonwealth Games. We saw people like Emma McKeon skip Worlds to focus on Commonwealths. Also, Ariane Titmus, Kyle Chalmers was going to skip Worlds, but obviously went off the back of his results. So we can probably expect to see an Australian team at least who are right up for this and at the top of their game.
Yeah, I think the opportunities for pre-selection that seem to come out for quite a few countries from the Olympics gave people perhaps more of a chance to choose what they wanted to do and what they wanted to prioritise, and gave them the chance for that break after the Olympics, which I think it's typically a really good year for a break, but obviously things are a little bit different now. We're in a 3-year cycle, but I think it's certainly good that some athletes have been able to both have that break and compete at a major championships. They're not having to take the full year off. But yeah, there aren't a load that we're missing from World Championships, but there are certainly a few real impact swimmers like Emma McKeon, as you say. I think possibly one side effect that we didn't anticipate is seeing how strong the Australians are without her. I don't see her place in that team as necessarily being as cemented as it was before the World Championships because of how strong they are generally. So I think it'll be interesting to see what kind of shape she is in, because I don't think we've seen her race at all.
Well, indeed. So her getting back in will be one of the stories to follow in Birmingham. Let's take a little stroll through the different events that we've got coming up, starting with the freestyle, and an event, Ross, that's close to your heart, the 200 free, which for men is looking like it's going to be one of the premier events of the Games. I mean, I've often said that the standard at Commonwealth is normally extremely high at the top, but not necessarily that deep. But this is not an event where that occurs this time. I mean, if you look at the people who are in it, it's going to be quite a race.
Yeah, it certainly is. And I think when you look at the rankings and when you look at the different events, and 200 metres are straight heats and finals, so you don't have that luxury to either cruise some of the heats. You look at the depth, and I think like Matt Richards is like 14th or something on a 148. He's way down on the rankings, so fully expect him for representing Wales, which is just adds a whole different dynamic to when these swimmers normally swim for Great Britain, and now they're swimming for Wales or for Scotland, or in some cases for Ireland. It really does bring out the best in those home nation swimmers. So it's going to be really tough. I think there's only probably 3 or 4 swimmers within the top 10 that will be almost banking for a final spot, and then the rest of them are really going to have to go for it and lay down a market in the heats just to make the finals. And that's not just for the freestyle events, that goes for a lot of the 200 and above events.
Well, we missed Bob Duncan Scott in Budapest. He was unfortunately struck down with the COVID. He'll be back representing Scotland in Birmingham and taking on Tom Dean, the Olympic champion in the 200 free. There's the rising star from South Africa, Matt Sates, a few other Aussies in there as well. But what do we think we can expect from Duncan? He's so resilient normally. Thinking he'll be back to his best?
Yeah, I'm sure he's not going to go unless he is at his very best. And, he had COVID and he got that out of the system. Interesting, he's not going to the Europeans, so he's putting all his eggs in this basket. So he obviously really wants to go for this in a big way. He'll want to get the IM events, he'll want to get the freestyle events, and he'll want to be competitive in the Scottish 4x2 as well, and probably 4x1. But yeah, the fact he's not doing the Europeans and he's putting everything in lock, stock and barrel towards Birmingham suggests to me that we're going to see a really supercharged Duncan Scott for 6 days.
I've got a slightly different view, Bob, which is that, I mean, I very much hope that he's better and in top form, and I've got no reason to think that he's not. But I think you'd have a really hard job keeping Duncan away, even if he's not at 100%. I feel like he's an incredibly proud Scotsman, and the chance doesn't come along often to race for Scotland. I think things would have to be really bad to keep him away from this, even if he just went and swam a relay. I think we'll see him in some way or another, unless he actually can't compete at the moment.
No, he'll be there. He'll be there throughout the whole lot. I'm saying that he won't do Europeans.
Yeah.
Because I think he wants to put everything into his performance in Birmingham.
What you can't underestimate is that home games. I don't think you can underestimate the Commonwealth Games as a whole. I think we hear so often it's the friendly games. Yes, it is the friendly games, but it is also a little bit more relaxed than the Olympic Games. So it brings out the best performances in the majority of people. And I don't think we can underestimate that home crowd, whether you're England, Wales or Scotland, and also the fact that certainly we had a really good depth going into the Gold Coast, and in some events Australia have stepped forward massively. Canada have some very strong swimmers, and like I say, South Africa have some strong swimmers as well. This isn't going to be as easy as it has been in previous years, but the underdog tag that I think a lot of our swimmers will have, certainly against the Australians, is going to play in our favour. And I think you're going to see some surprises where, okay, you think there might be a 1, 2, 3 Australian, especially in the girls' freestyle. It might not be the case, and it's all about who keeps their nerve and who can rise to the occasion, because there is medals up for grabs.
But weirdly, Ross, we've seen a situation like the 2012 Olympics, for example, and indeed the 2006 commies with Australia, where they actually underperformed. Australia's men underperformed, as you well know, in 2006. And as a team, we underperformed in 2012 with no great expectation. So it can work both ways, can't it?
It can, but certainly on both of those occasions, I would say that certainly in 2006, the Australian team, especially the men, were an aging team, and they were hanging on to go to a home Commonwealth Games, and I think they probably rest a little bit on their laurels, thinking that they're going to sweep everybody to one side. And again, the British team in London 2012, it was more of an aging team, but what you have seen is the emergence from both of those competitions. Certainly for Great Britain going into 2016 and obviously in Tokyo last year, the amount of and I know it's used a lot, but the inspiring of that generation and really getting people ignited to sport. From my own point of view, I remember watching the 2002 Manchester Commonwealth Games, and that was my first games really of watching and being inspired by seeing James Goddard win from lane 8, or was it 1? I can't remember which side of the pool it was in the 200 back. Seeing Adam Whitehead win the breaststroke when he probably wasn't going to be a medal contender. So, this is going to really ignite, especially being in Birmingham, especially being in England and in the UK. It's really going to have a double boost from what London did, because there's people that are still inspired by London, but now the next generation need to be kick-started again for the next 4, 8, 12 years moving forward.
Well, always a benefit of having the games at home, certainly. Let's bring it back to action in the pool that we might see in Birmingham. Katie, you weren't with us for the Worlds wrap-up that Bob and I did, but we saw Ben Proud take that world title in Budapest. He's got a chance to go for a third consecutive 50 freestyle in Birmingham, which would be an incredible achievement.
Yeah, and he's got to be feeling really confident, coming off the back of Budapest and knowing what good shape he's in. I've seen quite a few interviews with him, and that third title does seem like such a goal for him. I expect big things from him. It's obviously not one that's without competition. There's a really good Josh Liendo, is it, from Canada, who seems to be improving kind of every time he gets in the pool. And you can never count out the Australians. I don't know if Chalmers will be swimming the 50 free or not. I've got slightly lost the plot on what events he'll be swimming at commies, given pre-selections, and I don't think they've actually produced a team sheet that shows what anyone's swimming. But it's not going to be plain sailing. But he's got to be the favourite for that title.
Don't discount Adam Barrett either.
Or Lewis Burrows, I suppose.
Yeah, well, exactly.
There's a Singaporean chap who I've seen has been training with Duncan and Dylan Carter, who's another person to watch up at Stirling in the last couple of weeks. So I think there'll be a few people in the 21s, certainly. And it could be an exciting final, that one. Anyone care to put money on whether England will press Ben into service for the 4x1?
Oh, he's going to resist, isn't he?
I don't think we need him, do we? I say we. I should be very careful because we're talking about GB, but I don't.
He's a one-length wonder now.
I would say I don't think they need him.
Yeah, I would tend to agree.
I think there's enough depth. I don't think there's a quartet already in place for that. So, all right, they're going to have to swim the same quartet in the heats, but I don't think he'll get. I don't think he's needed.
I think that's another point, actually, Bob. I'm not sure it's a given that there are heats for all of these relays at Commonwealth Games. I think some of them might well be straight finals, just given the number of nations that field a full relay team, which is helpful and changes the landscape a bit from Worlds, in that some of our swimmers who had such heavy schedules.
4x1 probably will have semis, I think. 4x1.
Yeah, but Bob, I think it's just worth noting that certainly for 4x1, yes, there's probably going to be 10, 12 teams maybe that enter it, but you can, going back from previous history, I remember swimming and I anchored, and I think I did something like 53, 54, just because we were so far ahead of...
We did backstroke.
I certainly wasn't doing backstroke. No, we definitely wouldn't have made it. But the point is, you certainly for a team like England, they can put in different members in the heats if there are heats, and they can just swim a completely different team, even if some of those swimmers are only going to go 51, 52, 53. So I don't see that's going to be an issue in terms of the amount of swims certain swimmers will have. 4x2, there probably won't be heats for, so that helps as well. But it's that strength and depth. I think the first 3, 4, 5 teams are going to be really strong, and then it will just drop off towards the end in the relays.
All right, let's flick over to the women's sprints then. We've talked to Katie about the Australian women who were crazy fast in Budapest. They're adding Emma McKeown, who's another crazy fast sprinter. Even if we don't know if she'll be swimming the sprint free, you'd think she would be. I think that's how she was pre-selected. They've got a real shot at clean sweeps in all of the 100, 250, you'd think.
400. I think.
Yeah, 400
800 maybe. I think they do have a shot, but I think so I don't think I've ever seen Freya Anderson swim in front of a home crowd. I'm not sure it's an opportunity she's had. Maybe she's done a meet in Glasgow. I can't think, but
yeah, Glasgow Europeans long and short, but never in England. I
think this sense of occasion, I'd be quite interested to see how she reacts to that, because she seems now like such a confident racer. She really stepped up at Worlds, I thought. Was just off the podium and there was chances there. I think being that close to the podium in Budapest is probably going to be something that's going to be spurring her on to try and get that in front of a home crowd. So I think there are chances there. I'm sure the Aussies will be, confident in their chances, but I don't think it's a given. I know we spoke before, I don't think we've seen the best of her in the 400 free. Presumably she'll be swimming that again in Birmingham, so there's another chance there. I think the top of the podium, to be honest, I think the number one spot is fully occupied by Australians, and I can't see us squeezing past in any of the women's freestyle events just because of how strong they are. But I don't think a clean sweep of the whole podium is necessarily a given. That feels like a pretty weak argument to make, but I just think that's the show of the Australian strength rather than our weakness. And I suppose we shouldn't count out Canada, even though they're missing a few. Their women's freestyle's pretty strong.
I was going to say Summer McIntosh.
Yeah.
Well, young Summer's there, isn't she?
That's going to be I think that's going to be one of the races of the meets between Ariana Titmus and Summer McIntosh, because she is just improving. You look at the rankings, and certainly for the 200, they're 1.5 seconds apart. But she's improving so much, and she has that probably a bit more natural speed. So it's going to be really interesting. But I would agree with Katie that certainly the top of, if not 1, 2, 3 on certain events of those sprint freestyles for female, potentially are going to go to Australia. I think Freya's best chance, if she can put a race together and put a perfect plan, will probably be the 200 freestyle, just because I think those Aussie girls are a little bit too quick down that first 50 on the 100. So we all know that Freya just doesn't really tend to slow down, and she just speeds up, certainly over the back half of the race. But I think unfortunately for the 100, that race might have already been cooked, but we'll have to see.
And I guess we hope that Anna Hopkin is back to her best that she showed in Tokyo. She's been a little bit off that so far this year, but focusing on Birmingham Bob probably. So if she's back to her best, she'll be in with a shout.
Well, again, that's the impression I got from Budapest. Yeah, that's the impression I got from Budapest. She was one of those people I was kind of identifying at the beginning, who was looking better as the week went on. And you think, right, with a block of work between that and Birmingham, I think she'll be fine next week.
All right, well, fingers crossed for her. Just a quick jump up to the distance free. I know, Bob, this is your pet subject that we know you feel we ought to do better at, but it's an amazing chance for Dan Jervis, I think, this time around in the 1500, and it'd be really great to see him do well and take a medal. Yeah,
but do you know where his main adversary might come from?
Dan Whiffen.
Mr. Dan Whiffen, who broke the Irish record in the 800 and the 15 in Budapest. So Dan Whiffen might actually be his nearest challenger for that.
Yeah, Dan trains at Loughborough. First time under 15 minutes on that 1500 in Budapest. I think he broke something like the 400, the 800 and the 1500 Irish records a couple of weeks before Worlds, and then did it all again at Worlds. So yeah, he's improving. Still probably around about 10 seconds off in terms of the pace, but improving every single race. So on that 1500, it's 10 seconds off.
And we might see Toby Robinson go sub 15 for the first time as well, Steve, because Toby's now a late addition to the 1500 team.
Yeah, late call up to the team off the back of 10k at Budapest, but yeah, he's an interesting shout for that event. Let's move on, talk breaststroke. The big story here for England, at least, the return of Adam Peaty after his broken foot. Ross, how do you think you can bounce back from a broken foot? 8 weeks ago? Did he do it to come back and compete in Birmingham? I mean, you feel like he's got enough of a buffer for Commonwealths, at least, that he needn't be right at his very best and still be, the one to beat.
Yeah, how do you bounce back from a broken foot? If you're a general public or you're just a normal swimmer, you probably would struggle big time. But when you have the mindset of somebody like Adam, then I think he's going to be like a coiled spring when he gets out there. You've seen some of the social media posts. He's as chiseled as he always is. He's worked hard. He's probably worked at some of the weaknesses that he's wanting to work on. He's still been able to lift in the gym. He's still been doing cardio on the bike. And he's probably going to have had 3-4 weeks of actual breaststroke. So I think he'll be all right.
Is there a chance James Wilby could beat him?
No.
Did you want to think about that for any longer, Ross?
I think you've just got. I think. Well, of course he could, but Adam, in front of a home crowd at the Commonwealth Games, which was really where he came to light in 2014, no chance. Sorry, James, but no chance.
No, fully fit Adam Peaty, absolutely not. But I'm just saying that this will be he's got to be ring rusty, hasn't he?
Maybe, but yeah, I'm just trying to, I'd love to see them have a cracking race, but I just feel like Adam's missed out on the World Championships. He's almost given up his World Championship without a fight because he had to, because he had broken foot. So he isn't going to give up anything else when he's in the race. In my opinion,
I think that's fair. But Bob, possibly a last hurrah for Ross Murdoch. Do we think?
Yeah, looking forward to see Ross back in there. I hope the beard comes off, because he's not shaving, but he's not going to swim with that beard. I hope that he's been showing us on social media for the last few weeks. So it's great. I mean, Ross is one of the great survivors, isn't he? A decade or more now on international teams. This will be his swan song, I imagine, unless he can get on the team for Paris. But I can't. Maybe another Worlds potentially, but I think this probably will be his swan song. And what a great servant he's been to Britain and to Scotland, of course, as he was in 2014.
Absolutely, and we hope he can go out on a high if this is when he chooses to end things. Let's flip over to the women. Katie, you and I were talking about this earlier, actually, that the South Africans look the ones to beat, actually, in the breaststroke events, more than perhaps the Australians. I mean, Tatiana Schoenmaker, is that right, Bob?
Now, I've got to remember, because I was told by a South African how to get it right, so I've got to remember this again for next week now. Schoenmaker, I think. Yeah, I'm going to have to check with Martin Gillingham, my South African friend, who managed to correct me a couple of times during the Olympics. I'll make sure we get that right. Yeah. Who we didn't see at the Worlds, of course. Yeah.
No, so she skipped Worlds and is somebody who is focused on Birmingham, obviously the Olympic champion in the 200. Did she win the 100 as well? I think.
No, second in the 100, but broke the world record in the 2 and would have won at Worlds by a long way. Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think they do look like the ones to beat. The Australians were sort of surprisingly strong, I thought, in the breaststroke at Worlds. So I wouldn't count them out. And then obviously we've got Abby and Molly who did pretty solid swims at Worlds, and I think have been I think Abby's not been well, so hopefully she's had a bit more chance to recover and we can see her back stronger in Birmingham. But we've also got, I thought Molly was pretty good at Worlds, but particularly her 100, to be honest. So I wouldn't count us out. But there's chances for the South Africans to dominate across all 3 distances, because they've got at least one person who's really strong, and then 2 in the 100 and 200.
Yeah, so I think they're the ones to watch. Imogen Clark, I think, is an interesting one for England in the 50. There was an argument that she could have gone to Worlds based on her trials performance, but 50 is not the focus of British swimming. Not so much here where Team England can pick her. So I think she's a good shout in the 50, and I'm interested to see how Cara Hanlon can go internationally. I think they've picked her for Europeans, Britain, so I think maybe they see her as one for the future and her chance to kind of show that on the international stage. So someone I think for me to watch out for in the women's breaststroke. Let's jump on to backstroke. Probably one of our better areas in Budapest, Bob. Particularly Luke and Brodie in the 200, they'll go again. They head the Commonwealth rankings. It'd be nice to see a 1-2, wouldn't it?
Very excited to see what Brodie can do after a great Budapest. He got faster through the rounds in Budapest. Luke did what Luke always does these days. And a 1-2 is certainly not out of the question for England with that, I think. In fact, Brodie's getting to a situation where he might now start to challenge Luke a little bit. I think Luke's still got the edge on him, but the strides he made, the improvements he made in Budapest were very impressive.
Indeed they were. On the women's side, Ross, we saw Maddie Harris make her international debut in Budapest. Always nice to see someone come through. She had a lot thrown at her in Budapest, a lot of events. Became very important in terms of relays, so it'd be nice for her to back it up with perhaps a bit less pressure.
Yeah, I thought she was brilliant actually at World's first senior competition, and it just seemed she didn't seem to be too phased about anything. Relays, swim-offs, all these different things that she had to face, she seemed to take it in a stride, and I think that will stand her in great stead moving forward. And again, I think coming, without harping on about the Commonwealth Games, coming back off the Worlds to a Commonwealth Games, being a little bit more relaxed really does bring out that best in swimmers. And I think she'll be one that will have huge amounts of confidence coming from the World Championships, and now is looking at potentially really challenging for those medals in Birmingham. So hopefully she can walk away with some I say silverware, but hardware, and hopefully she can start to add that collection and start to build over that over the next couple of years.
Well, the women's backstroke will be tough. I mean, we've got Kylie Mass swimming. I think Canada are bringing her. I think Ingrid Wilm might be swimming. Kaylee McKeown, Molly O'Callaghan, who can swim anything fast. It seems so. It will be tough, but yeah, hopefully Medi can do a great job.
But just going back to what I said earlier, there will be opportunities. And, we've seen Canada, Ben Titley's left in terms of, he coached a lot of those girls. He's left and gone to Barcelona now. So they're in a whole new setup from their trials, which was in, April time. So we don't know how they're going to swim. We don't know how they're going to travel. The Australian team have been travelling since before Budapest. So they've been away from home for, I think in total it's about 8 to 10 weeks. So you don't know how that's going to affect them in terms of being homesick. So there will be opportunities in any event. Yes, okay, we can put gold medals around people's necks, but it's not going to be plain sailing for these guys that are certainly ranked at the top of the rankings. And that's why I think people like Medi can really step up and can really challenge. And then again, especially in front of a home crowd.
Well, we would love to see that, obviously. One name in the men's I wanted to mention and I skipped over was South African Peter Kurtzer. That's another one, Bob, you need to check for next week. Who they are very excited about. Wright Needing described him as the Cameron van der Berg of backstroke, potentially, for South Africa. So he was ill, I think, before Budapest. We didn't see him there. But, a name to watch out for on the backstrokes. So keep an eye out for him. Butterfly, James Guy, Bob, he took on the 200 in Budapest. Big PB for him, in fact, made the final, but possibly paid for having to do the 3 rounds with everything else he does. As Ross has already said, no semi-finals for 200s this time. It could suit him, the 200 fly. Yeah,
I think it will. I think he's, again, somebody's going to be better than he was in Budapest, I'm sure, in Birmingham. And you're right, he had to go for broke because of the quality of the field there was in Hungary that week. And I think with a slightly less full-on field with great medal prospects for him. I think he'll thrive, and he also loves the home crowd. He's done it at the Europeans, and I think he'll love it this time round.
What do we think about Chad le Clos? I mean, he's maybe towards the end of his career, but he's still obviously a quality performer. Any ideas on what we might see from him? I mean, he'll be up against James in the 200 fly, we would think.
I think there's quite a few of the South Africans that we haven't really seen because we haven't seen what they can do, because they're obviously really excited about Matt Sates, and we didn't see anything really at Worlds. I think there was some suggestion that he'd been unwell. Chad was unwell. I don't know if there was something going around their camp, so that they feel quite unknown. I don't think Chad tends to turn up to major events. He either turns up massively or he doesn't, if you know what I mean. And the fact that he couldn't at Worlds meant that he pulled himself out of it. I would have thought that he probably doesn't have another 4 years in him, and this might well be his last Commonwealth Games. I could be putting words in his mouth, and maybe that's completely unfair, but if he's there, I'd imagine that he'd want to give it a good crack and see what he can do. I think it is a big event in South Africa, even if they have to pay to go themselves, which sounds to be the way in the South African team. But I don't think he'll go down without a fight.
Well, we'll look forward to seeing that. Ross, as a sprint freestyler yourself, what do you make of Kyle Chalmers taking up butterfly?
Well, I think if you're good enough, then you can do it. I think he surprised himself at the Aussie trials. I think obviously he wrote himself out of the World Championships, but actually really did surprise himself. And so he decided to do the World Championships, and obviously knocked off Cody Simpson. So he's making his debut for Australia. So a pop star now turned swimmer, and a pretty good swimmer as well. I'm sure his swimming's better than anybody else's singing on the team. So it'd be interesting to see, the media attention around that. Because he's a huge star, even though I've never heard of him before he started swimming.
I feel like that, Ross. I've heard he's a huge star.
Yeah, I think you talk about Chad and you talk about James and Duncan. One thing that they're born racers. So an unfit Chad is still going to be competitive. It's the same as James on that 200 fly. He's going to go out so hard, no doubt, like he did in the Worlds, and just race it as a born racer in front of a home crowd. But COVID's going to play a part. It's still here, it's still around, and you're bringing so many teams together. It will have an impact on somebody somewhere. Just fingers crossed it doesn't happen to any of the home nation swimmers.
Indeed, yeah. We hope everyone can make it through healthy. Flicking over to the women, obviously Maggie McNeil, we've already mentioned. She's, well, I'm not sure we have mentioned her, but the Canadian team, she's one of the ones who kind of didn't swim Worlds fully. She swam relays, but she should be back in action in individual events in Birmingham. Obviously the Olympic champion in the 100 fly, so she'll be one that's right up there looking to win medals. Summer McIntosh again in the 200 fly, she was excellent in Budapest, so another one. From a home nation's perspective, Katie, Laura Stevens is an interesting one. She's definitely got the talent to be right up there in the challenge for medals, but just needs to find a bit more consistency, it feels like.
Yeah, we've seen that she can swim the times. The struggle seems to be swimming them when it matters a little bit, and it's not that her taper's not right, because she might do it in one of the rounds, but kind of we haven't got to the point where she's putting together her best performance in the final yet. So it would be great to see her do that here. And then it's someone else that we haven't seen yet is Alice Thomas, who did that incredible 200 fly swim in the Gold Coast to win the gold. But we haven't seen her race, I don't think, at all this year. Another one that I think took a bit of a break after the Olympics, and fair enough. But we haven't seen her swim trials or anything, so it'll be interesting to see what kind of shape she's in this time round.
Indeed, and a couple of young up and comers in the Scotland team. I think Kiana McInnes in the 200 could be worth keeping an eye on. I think she's due a bit of a drop, so maybe Scotland can pick something up there as a bit of a bolter. move on to the medleys. I mean, we've spoken about Duncan's comeback, Bob, already. You'd like to think he'd be challenging in both of those. Maybe he won't be as fast as he was at trials, but he's right up there at the top.
Well, it's going to be him against Tom Dean part 2, won't it, or part 3 potentially with 3 events there. So yeah, I mean, it is the great unknown. But like we were talking about with Adam Peaty, Adam's had his problems, he's had his travails this year, as has Duncan. But they are born racers, and I've said before on here that Duncan, I think, is the best all-round male swimmer that we've ever produced. So we'll see him, I'm sure, at his optimum in Birmingham.
Yeah, well, there should be some excellent races. We'll talk about Matt Sates already, but he's in the 200 AM as well. Lewis Clareburt, probably one of New Zealand's best chances for a medal, in there in that 400 medley as well. So there'll be some very close racing there, and some new names, I'm sure, on the podium. On the women's side, Summer McIntosh again, Kelly McKeown, who's obviously been playing around with the medleys. Be nice to see Abby at the top of her game though, Katie. Abby Wood.
Yeah, it sounds like she has had a pretty tough year. I think she had some like quite a few illnesses in a row, following the Olympics, and has been getting through those. So it would be great to see her back to the sort of shape that we had her in last year. It is a tricky year post Olympics, and there's an awful lot that's being thrown at these athletes, and I know it's their job, but when you are challenged by illness, it's pretty hard to just kind of get through that, and there hasn't been that long since Worlds, so I don't know if it's possible for her to recover to the point that she needs to be top of her game. It is a really strong women's medley field. We've mentioned Summer. Kaylee McKeon, I think, has said she's going to do the 400 IM at Commonwealth Games. Be interested to see if she has revised that opinion after seeing how well Summer McIntosh did at Worlds. And then we've got Sydney Pickram as well from Canada. So I think they should be really, really competitive events, and hopefully we'll see some good swims from Freya Colbert and maybe Katie Shanahan from the home nations, particularly in the 400.
Yeah, that would be very nice. So some chances there if people can get back to their best, and get over their illnesses and what have you. We've touched on relays a little bit already. In terms of depth, I did joke about Ben Proud in the 4x1. Bob, you said you didn't think they need him, and I think you're right. Potential quartet of Lewis Burris, James Guy, Jacob Whittle, and Tom Dean. You could conceivably make them the favourites for that event, England, which is a bit of a surprise. I don't think I can ever remember thinking that heading into a Commonwealth Games with Australia competing. But Australia obviously have Kyle Chalmers, who is known for dropping ludicrous anchor splits. I think probably a great battle in store in that one, Ross.
Yeah, and if my knowledge is correct, I don't think that England have ever won that event. So it should be a huge upset if that's the case, because I think they can do it. I think, and again, they'll all be up for it. They'll be all wanting to make history, and Australia are going to be strong, but that English team could quite easily be the British team. Okay, you'd want to have Duncan on that, but it's a strong team, and certainly for five of the four in terms of the relay and making the final, that is pretty much as strong other than Duncan that the British team will have.
Oh, what about the 4x2? Do you reckon, Ross?
I think
because you're taking a Welshman in England and a Scotsman out of the English quartet.
Yeah, it certainly makes it a lot harder. But I love the relays. So it's hopefully they're going to be really, really close. Hopefully we fall on the right side of that. 4x2, we certainly haven't. I think with Tom Dean, with James Guy. We've seen Jacob Whittle do it at the European Juniors. So I actually think we've got a really good chance in the 4x2 as well. So.
Joe Litchfield as well.
Yeah, I think we've got a few to choose from.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, the team that won bronze in Budapest was all English, because it was James Guy, Jacob Whittle, Joe Litchfield, and then Tom on the anchor. So, in theory, they were just ahead of Australia there. So in theory, they should start as a favourite. But it doesn't work like that, does it?
I think I've said it before, and I know I've told Ross this. One of my favourite races of all time was England against Scotland in Melbourne 2006. And who was on the anchor that day?
Some slow Australian. That's all I know.
Yeah, one of my favourite races. Ross and I have spoken about that race before. I'll put a link in the notes to this podcast where you can hear him talk about that race in lots of detail, because it is, as you say, Bob, a fantastic battle for that one. On the women's side, I think Australia will with Canada depleted, I think Australia will be favourites for all of them. I guess the question, Katie, is if they get Emma back and she's on form, do you think they can break their world record in the 4x1?
I think they can break their record in the 4x1 if they don't get Emma back or she's not on form, to be honest. I think they were so close in Budapest, and that was with a team that kind of seems quite surprised about how good they were. They now know it. So I mean, I would, unless COVID intervenes, I'd be surprised if that world record doesn't go down, and I think it'll be a major goal for them.
Well, one to watch out for. I think that's covered the big stories for the Commonwealth Games. So there's going to be some amazing racing in Birmingham. As Ross has highlighted, there'll undoubtedly be some new names, some bolters, whatever, make their way through, and plenty of stories. But we've got lots to look forward to there. Just quickly though, because it was announced today, the day we were recording, the teams come out, Bob, for the Europeans. Lots of, I think everybody pretty much in that team is bouncing straight on to Europeans from Birmingham. So nice to hear some few new names, 8 debutants for Britain. So nice to see a big team going, 31 swimmers.
Yeah, and I wasn't sure they were going to do that. I thought later in the year that they might treat that as the least priority of the year. But in terms of numbers, it's turned out to be quite the reverse. There's certainly a lot of established names, and as you say, a lot of new names who are emerging. It's going to give them a great platform for the Worlds for next year.
Well, we saw in 2014 that the team can bounce from one to the other and do very well. They didn't have Worlds before, but obviously there was 2 weeks between Glasgow and Berlin, and the team did brilliant in both, so hopefully they can do well. One other thing that's come up this week that I want to get Ross and Katie's view on is the dates for World Championships in 2024. February 2024, just a few months before an Olympic Games, and FINA have said that they want relay qualification, Ross, to come from that meet. If you were a swimmer, how would you be feeling? Or if you were still swimming, rather?
Yeah, to be honest with you, it's a tough one, because we're going to have to send, unless I think it's top 3, isn't it, to get pre-selected from the World Championships. If we miss out and we come fourth, like we did in Budapest on a couple of relays, and we don't qualify, then they're going to have to send a team in January to cement those places for Paris. In terms of, from a swimmer's point of view, some swimmers will relish it, because it's another chance to go to World Championships, it's another chance to win medals. But for somebody that needed a big block of work, it's going to be a disruption 3 months out from the Olympic trials. So there's going to be a lot of racing. You're going to have the World Championships straight back into training. Then in terms of the Christmas break, you're not going to have any time to have a break into the World Championships. And then you're not going to have any time after that. And then you're into the Olympic trials. And then you're straight into the Olympic preparation. So it's going to be busy. It's going to be really busy. And they seem like they're trying to cram in and make up for lost time, where there doesn't need to be a World Championships 3 months after a World Championships. From a purist, it should be the best in the world. They should try and keep the Worlds every 2 years, keep the Olympics every 4 years. So if you are an Olympic champion, you have that title for 4 years. If you are a world champion, you have that for 2 years, not 3 months. And if people opt out to go, and then you lose that title. So I don't see why they need to do it. But they're obviously putting pressure on federations that they have to do it, which I think is unfair.
I mean, Katie, you and I were debating this a bit earlier, and the prospect that, if Ross says, if Britain doesn't come top 3 in 2023 and doesn't qualify the teams, and you can think that the men's medley relay, the mixed medley relay, men's 4x2, you would like to think would have great shots at medals in 23 and therefore get that spot automatically. But some of the others, men's 4x1 or whatever, might fall just short. We debated whether that Britain might send, maybe not the A team, but send some fringe swimmers who could make, because I say only, they would only have to make the top 12 or the top 15 in heats, depending on who's pre-qualified to actually get the spot at the Olympics. So possibly it opens up an opportunity for some other people.
Yeah, I think it does. It ends up feeling, actually, and this might be too strong, but this is my feeling, is that it's an abuse of power by FINA to push people to attend that and to force them to attend if they want to have a relay entered at the Olympics. I think it should be a choice, and it should be a choice that's taken up by those who qualify and who are, as Ross said, the ones that relish the opportunity to race and don't need that time to train. But I also think that the early part of the year is there's a lot more value in it than there ever has been before, because with COVID around, we don't know. And obviously, we really, really hope that by then it's not affecting our winters in the same way that it has been. But we don't know if that's going to be the case or not. There might be people who were in Tom Dean's position from last year and need to be making up a block of work, and it's just not an option. So, I assume there's a lot of money-based reasons that I don't understand why they need to force that event to take place, and why they need to force people to attend it. But I think I'd feel pretty annoyed about a governing body that uses its power like that, which I think is in a way that's at the expense of the athlete's performance and preparation.
Here's my take, Steve, and I'll make it brief, that Dubai will not happen that year. It'll happen the year after. Kazan will get cancelled.
Well, I think everybody would be happy if that was the case. So fingers crossed.
Well, one thing I will say, FINA have done a lot of, certainly improved over the last 6 to 12 months in terms of the way that they look at the athletes and the way, certainly on the back of the ISL. So I was surprised that they've put this in, but I do think they potentially might listen to some of the big name swimmers and actually, as Bob says, maybe revise some of their plans. And especially if Kazan is cancelled, then there's a slot there that it can go back to the original plan as we all know it, of every 2 years.
Well, it would be lovely to go back to a normal calendar, but that's a little way off. We don't need to necessarily worry about that right now, because we've got Birmingham Commonwealth Games right on our doorstep, as it were, and coming up quickly. As we've said through this podcast, there'll be some great racing in Birmingham, some new names hopefully making an announcement of themselves onto the world stage. So we'll look forward to seeing that. Bob, Katie, Ross, thanks ever so much for giving us your thoughts. Loved hearing them. We'll be back after Commonwealth to chew over what happens. If you want to get in contact in the meantime, find me on social media at Pullbuoy or at Pullbuoy UK on Instagram and Facebook. We've been putting out a lot of extra podcasts with a bit of Commonwealth Games nostalgia. You can find them at pullbuoy.co.uk/memories. Just looking back at some of the games gone past and some of the big stories from previous games. Check them out. And in the meantime, thanks for listening.
You've been listening to the Pullbuoy podcast. For more episodes, visit www.pullbuoy.co.uk/podcast.